Hello, everybody. Welcome to this Code Labs talk. Today we are going to hear from James, who works at PayPal and went to Cornell.
Hey, everyone. So just as a brief overview of my experience and my background, I had a pretty unique high school experience. So I applied to lots of colleges. My parents both went to a pretty good school, so I was pretty familiar with the college admissions process and wanted to share some of that information. I've been volunteering for CodeDay for the past 5 years. Everything from 4-person large code days in Southern Florida to multiple 100-person large computer science fairs all across the country. I graduated from Cornell in 2018. I majored in economics. I actually didn't major in computer science like a lot of people, but through a long-winded process, I ended up working for PayPal as a software engineer. So I just wanted to share some context about how I was able to do that, how I was able to go from a not really a computer science major to working in computer science as a software engineer for a pretty well-known company. So I will try to save a good bit of this call for Q&A, just to answer a fair bit of questions that everyone might have about the experience of going to a top university, going to grad school even, and getting my first job, my first internship, so on, for topics like that. So just to provide a background for my own personal experience, when I applied to colleges, I wasn't really sure what I wanted. I was living abroad at the time, so I didn't get the opportunity to visit really any of the colleges I was applying to. I think I had actually only been to about 4 or 5 of the colleges I applied to out of about 25. So I kind of applied somewhat randomly and applied to a lot of top colleges. I would say that that was a fairly successful approach to it. So for college admissions in general, there are a few certain kind of rules or guidelines. If you want to get into a top college or a very good college, you probably want to be able to focus on having a pretty good background. So whether that be GPA or extracurriculars, and it's a bit more complicated there. So if you try to target extracurriculars, you may want to look up what is a bit more appealing to college admissions. A lot of the time, that's going to be things like music, sports, or making a real impact if you do decide to create your own student club or create a nonprofit or do volunteering work. If you are going down that route, it's a bit kind of more difficult or nuanced to control. Trying to create an impact for a nonprofit is something that could be its entirely own topic. So I don't want to focus too much on that. What I would prefer to focus on a bit instead, but I can touch upon everything during Q&A, is to just talk about how the sort of application process itself goes. So it's important, of course, to have pretty high standardized test scores. So SAT, ACT, things like that. My general advice for any high schoolers in this call is going to be start early and practice often. So my parents actually, maybe a bit stereotypically, or maybe just because they had gone through the process and they were familiar with it and knew how kind of arbitrary it was, had me practicing from a pretty early age just to get familiar with SAT type questions, ACT type questions, and doing tests in such a timed environment when the test questions were so unusual and different from what a typical exam would be. So really just going through practice tests is what I attribute a lot of my success within the testing process to. So I first did an ACT, or at least a practice ACT, when I was maybe 13 or 14, and did a actual ACT when I was about, I think, 15 or 16. And then when I went through and was actually applying to colleges for real, I took it twice. So I took it once around when I turned 18, and then once about maybe 3 or 4 months later, just to see if I could improve my score at all. And one major change from a few years ago is that a lot of top schools now are actually considering your top score from each section. So retaking it can only help you, not hurt you. In terms of how to actually apply, a lot of college applications start pretty early. So I actually missed the application deadline for the University of Washington when I was applying for my undergrad, because I didn't realize that it was, about 2 or 3 months earlier than a lot of the other colleges I was applying to. There's also this process called early admission, or early admission, or there's like one other paradigm that's a bit less binding. And that will improve your chances a little bit to getting into a certain college, but you can only do it for, early decision. But you can only do it for one university. So it's useful to think about what you want in a college and which college you may want to apply to early decision. And it's useful to kind of reach further with that application. So I don't even remember which. I think I applied to Brown University for early decision, didn't get in, and I actually ended up getting off the wait list for Cornell. And that brings me to the second point of try to apply to a lot of places. Obviously, there's a $100 application fee for each college, but if you can, so for low-income students, a lot of colleges actually do offer application fee waivers. So I would, look up that process and make sure that you're ahead of it so that you can get those fees waived if you need to, so that you can apply to colleges just to increase your chances of getting into the college that you want to attend. The next, I guess, large point is the essay portion of the application. I honestly don't know how much really tried and true advice there is to this part of the process. Out of the 20 some schools I applied to, I got into about 5. And so I would say one important thing to note is that this entire process is a bit kind of arbitrary. I got waitlisted to schools that were, some of the best ranked in the country, but then got flat out rejected from ones that were ranked way, way worse, and traditionally just had much lower averages for things like GPA and AP scores, things like that for admits. So for the essay, I would say it's important to be a good writer, and it's important to, try your best, but really throughout the entire process, including for the essay, I wouldn't say that it's something that will really define your application as much as just being generally aware of, how important the tests are, how important extracurriculars are. There are a few traditional rules or, suggestions for the essay. So try not to start with cliches. So don't say, the definition of college in the dictionary is blah, blah, blah. Those kinds of essays tend not to do very well. What tends to be a more effective approach is just to talk about something that you've experienced or that you've dealt with throughout high school. That could be anything from your experiences with an extracurricular, or experiences supporting relatives or family members, or it could just be about some passion that you have. So if you're just really into computer science and you started coding in middle school, and at one point you got really into making a game and that convinced you to love the field, or you just got really interested in politics or something like that. Try to talk about that and your experiences with that, as opposed to trying to create the perfect essay. Because I think the best thing that you can do is to really try to make yourself stand out as a person, as opposed to trying to, figure out what the perfect words to write are. The next thing I'll talk about is alumni interviews. I wouldn't say that every college has these. Out of all the schools I applied to, I think I had about 4 or 5 of these. They are a bit strange. I can kind of talk out of experience that they don't seem to play that big of a role in the application process. They can at times bring positive things into your application that could help you, but for the most part, they are just there to ensure that there's no like glaringly obvious red flags to the interviewer about the student. So when you do the alumni interview, it's important, don't miss the meeting. Try to dress nicely if you're going to be on video, or, assuming COVID goes away soon, when you meet in person. Be respectful, be kind, have some questions for your interviewer. But generally, beyond them saying, A-OK seems pretty cool, most alumni interviewers are going to say that about most students that seem relatively normal and relatively, considerate and intelligent. My mom actually does alumni interviews for her alma mater, which is MIT, and out of interviewing like 50 students or so and giving incredibly positive reviews about a lot of aspects of their things that would be on their application, I think only one of them has gone in so far. So, I think traditional college advice kind of focuses more than is necessary on that part of the college admissions process than is really necessary. And so with that general, I guess, overview of tips I have for the college admissions process, the thing that I really want to emphasize is just that it's not so much about, whether you think that only people who, start an amazing nonprofit during high school are going to get into Harvard or get into a school like Cornell, like I went to. What is true about those schools is that these are people who, even if they don't have a perfect GPA, most of them do have relatively good GPAs. The ones that don't explain it well in their application essays. So they explain, why was it that they struggled in school? Did they have to work a part-time job to help support their family? Did they just get so wrapped up in some extracurricular hobbies that they were just focused less on grades? So it's really important to just emphasize who you are as a person, as opposed to trying to be this picture perfect, image of a grade A student. It does, of course, help to, have sports and extracurriculars and things on your resume, but there are ways to get into good colleges, even if you don't, by really emphasizing your personality. And kind of on that note, when I applied to colleges, I was not actually the most competitive person. I didn't really have sports on my resume. I had been involved in some clubs, but only for the first 2 years of high school because I had a weird background and studied abroad for my last 2 years, which leaves a big gap in your application that I won't go into too much, but really, I just want to emphasize that people are capable of getting into top schools a lot more often than they think. So anyone with, above a 3.5 can probably get into a top university if they make the effort to, look up what are the top universities with the programs that you're interested in, making sure to apply to them, making sure to take the standardized tests enough time to get a competitive score, and to generally try to participate in some useful or some extracurriculars that are interesting to you. I know a good number of people with 4.0s at their high school maybe took no APs, or maybe just took 1 or 2 APs, or maybe they even had like a 3.7 or a 3.8, and just by nature of the fact that they did not apply to a school like Cornell, or they did not apply to a school like UCLA or Duke, things like that, they just had no chance. And a lot of the time, those friends of mine actually had much stronger backgrounds than me, but because I applied for a lot of these top colleges and they didn't, meant that I was able to get accepted into a handful of them, and they only got into the schools that they applied to, which were, less competitive, less prestigious. And that brings me to an extra point of college really is not everything. I've tried to provide some, general tips and overview of how I got to a top college, and, how I think others can try to get into top colleges. But I would just emphasize that, I've been to Cornell for undergrad, the University of Washington, and Georgia Tech for grad school. And I would say quality of education across all of them does not actually differ all too much. There are passionate teachers at every college that you will go to, even if it's a community college. I've had some great teachers at a community college that I attended, and I've had some terrible teachers at the top ranked computer science schools that I've attended. So it's just really important to know that even if you aren't competitive for a top university, there are many ways to get similar experiences and put yourself into the same position as an Ivy League graduate would be in. I'll try to avoid derailing myself too much, but I know people who went to community college, really focused on getting side projects on their resume, getting internships, getting co-ops, and that actually brought them further than a lot of the Cornell grads or certain Cornell grads that I know who had trouble getting jobs after graduation. I'll answer the 4 questions that are asked right now before moving on. My undergrad major was in economics. I did actually take some computer science classes at that time. I actually wasn't originally planning to apply to grad school leading up to graduation. I kind of did it out of a whim and didn't prepare all too much for it. So I just did the best I could with the resume I had. That happened to be some limited exposure to computer science from the classes I took and the volunteering I've done with CodeDay. And that allowed me to have the experience to apply to some technically minded master's programs. That being said, I am currently completing an online master's of computer science from Georgia Tech. It accepts not everyone, but it accepts most people who have a, data structures class and then algorithms class on their resume. So people who have some experience with computer science. And so, there are a lot of, and I I would say I really love that program and the opportunities and the quality of education it provides. So, start thinking outside the box. There are a lot of master's programs that actually are not super competitive that are at very good universities and even very prestigious universities. I would say if you aren't aiming for it kind of all throughout undergrad, that you should just do the best with what you have. Try to portray yourself in a way that really conveys what your interests and what your goals for that master's program are. So for me, I wanted, mostly technical focused master's programs because I knew I wanted to move more into the technology industry. And so I tried to portray that as best as I could and demonstrate, here's what I've done that shows how I am interested in tech. And a good way to do that was emphasizing, I volunteered for CodeDay, and I've really loved that experience. Is it true that, sorry, I'll start reading the questions as well too, just to make sure that everyone understands what I'm answering. So this next question is it true that if you apply in the early pool for top universities, it will be harder to get in because there is a stronger applicant pool during the early round? I would say that is not true. Take, for example, Cornell. Like I got in off the waitlist for Cornell, so I wasn't even accepted in the first stage. I was actually pushed off until later and accepted later. That is essentially the process that will happen if you apply early decision to any university. If they don't accept you at that point, then chances are that they will, almost every university will reconsider you at the next phase of admissions. So, and they'll, look at your resume anew. They will have different admissions officers looking at your resume and your application, sorry. And, that will basically give you a second point of consideration. So your chances are, the same as they would be if you applied normally, plus some extra for when they review you the first time during early decision. This next question is, for an extracurricular, if I'm interested in computer science and want to major in it, but also passionate about tackling dementia in the elderly, would it be okay to pursue being involved in dementia-related activities too? I would say entirely. Colleges tend to look for people who are. I'll be a bit specific here. In the United States, universities are generally pretty interested in finding applicants who are interested in multiple topics that aren't all concentrated in one area. So if a college is looking at your application and you wrote an essay about, working on helping figure out in some way dementia in the elderly, they also see that you're applying to computer science, they won't think, oh, this person has split interests, they're not good enough in computer science. What they'll see is, oh, this is someone who wants to study computer science and they're passionate about this issue. It's likely that this student will start looking at, doing computer science research to figure out how to help the elderly who may be suffering from dementia. And that to a university is a lot more appealing because they can see you as, a candidate who actually wants to apply the knowledge that they want to learn in college to a real issue, as opposed to just someone who wants to get a major, to get a job, to, and to graduate. Especially for top schools, that's something that would actually be very appealing. So definitely try to pursue extracurriculars that are, tangential or completely unrelated to the major that you want to do. Those can often be incredibly beneficial. There are two questions about what is a good GPA and what is a good ACT, SAT score. I can give a little bit of context here. So I had about a 3.8 GPA, and I had about a 31 ACT, I think, and that kind of split between sections. When I took the SAT, actually, I was scoring in like 600s, which is considerably like way, way, way lower to what an equivalent ranked ACT score would be. So hopefully that gives some baseline. Like for top universities, it's usually like 3.5 or above. If you're looking at like Ivy Leagues, and maybe 3.8 and above. But there are exceptions to that rule, as I mentioned previously. If you do have a lower GPA, I would try to link it somehow within your essay to explain, I know I didn't do that well in maybe freshman year when I was struggling with, certain other things, or, I know I wasn't as good a student then, but by senior year, I figured out how to study and I did much better. Because colleges will be able to understand that, even top colleges. No one's really, a lot of colleges will accept you even if you weren't perfect, from the moment that you switched from middle school to high school. In terms of that SAT, ACT thing, usually above 700 is considered good for an SAT and above 30 for an ACT. That being said, I wasn't as good in the SAT. I did much, much worse in it. And I just decided I'm not going to bother practicing this test because my baseline, like my score without studying for the ACT, is much higher. So a lot of that also comes back to just doing practice tests. You can get used SAT or ACT practice test books from like a used bookstore for, anywhere from like $1 to $10. And those are usually pretty good ways to practice. They let you just run through what the test would be like. And from that, actually, a lot of them will have kind of solutions to questions that you get wrong. So, go through, take the test like it's a real test, mark the ones that you get wrong, and then go read what they say about those questions. And just do that. I would say I did maybe 10 practice tests for the ACT before I got a score I was happy with. And would I recommend sending ACT and the SAT scores this year? It's hard to say. I don't think anyone will really be able to say until we actually see what college admissions do this year. I would say it's likely to depend on the university in question and how, I guess, traditional they are. A lot of Ivy League universities have tended towards considering standardized test scores to be very important, and other schools just consider it less important and have made it optional sooner. So I can't say I can give any great guidance here, except if you have a good score, it probably won't hurt you. So if you do have something that is above like 30 for the ACT or above 700 for the SAT, then it's probably worth sending. And I will answer, I guess, the next one or two questions before I move on to the other topics of the call, which are just about, what do you do when you're actually in college and finding a job? So one question is, how major focused should my undergrad application be if I'm looking at top programs? I would say it depends. Again, some universities do actually admit just to a sort of general pool. Other ones do have separate admissions depending on the program that you apply to. So Cornell, for example, has like 7 different colleges and they each have their own admissions processes. And then within that, there's also some programs that actually have their own admissions processes separate from the larger department or organization. So the application for applying to just the College of Arts and Sciences at my school is going to be a bit more general, and they will want to consider you from a more academic perspective. Whereas if you apply to the industrial labor relations school, then they are going to expect you to be very interested in industrial relations. So it will kind of depend on the school that you're applying to. I would recommend trying to do the research, try to find what are the admissions rates for different programs, if they are different at all. What do they look for, and how easy is it to switch between them? Because, for example, there are a lot of people at Cornell who actually apply to one of the colleges that has a higher admissions rate and then transfer into one of the more selective ones after a year or two. There's also some schools like the University of Washington where if you try to do that, it's actually substantially more difficult to get into your major, and you may not actually be able to get into that major if you don't apply to it right off the bat. And just as a specific call out, that is how the University of Washington does admissions for the computer science major. It is incredibly difficult to get into the major unless you apply to that major specifically. So just try to do your research as you apply to figure out which majors you want to note as what you're interested in. If you are applying to a specific major, then which one to apply to. I think I will segue now into college life in general. I generally wouldn't say that I actually enjoyed the first year or maybe two of my undergrad experience. I had various, difficulty in adjusting to life in college. But I would say that the things that helped me enjoy it the most and benefit the most from it were just to keep in mind that there were so many opportunities available on campus. This will differ a bit with COVID, especially for anyone that ends up going to a school that stays online at first, or for the first, few semesters that you're in college potentially. But even the online experience for a lot of colleges is likely to offer a lot of, extracurricular and fun type programming for people to do. And I would just really recommend exploring and making an effort to do those sorts of, non-academic, non-professional type things that your university offers. That could be everything from joining student clubs to, attending art shows on campus or, concerts, things like that. I would also say it's important not to get stuck in a bubble. When I was, so part of the reason why I didn't enjoy my first year or two in college was that being an economics major and being that major was so small, it was maybe 100 or 150 students, I actually didn't, I would say I didn't make too many friends within that group. I did make a handful, but I would say that my interests were generally different from a lot of those students. I was more interested in technology and the economy in general, and a lot of people in that program were more interested in finance and consulting. So it's just important to make sure to branch out of your major, branch out of your living group, things like that, and try to branch out into things that you just have, that you thought you might not be interested in originally, because that will allow you to find people that you get along with, find people that you could be friends with, and that will really help your college experience. I'll add a little side note here in case anyone wants to ask some questions about it. I would highly recommend trying to get involved in research or try to get an internship that you can do while you're in college, depending on if you are in a college that kind of allows for you to do that. So if you are in a more urban or suburban area, then trying to find a co-op or internship that you can do during school or just generally doing research during school is very beneficial for later employment. And just along a similar note, It's important both to take college seriously as a way to, build up your future, build up the career that you will end up pursuing in the future. But it's also important to explore while you're in college. Of course, I might be a bit biased because I was an economics major in undergrad. But if I hadn't started taking computer science classes, and I actually took them with no real intention at that point of switching over to working in technology, then I would never have found a passion for it, and I wouldn't be in the job that I am today. So try to take some classes outside of your primary interests. Even if you are adamant that you want to major in computer science or engineering or something that will help you get a job a bit easier than other majors, then consider, exploring those other classes, taking some of them, getting a minor or getting a double major in those topics if you are interested in them. I don't think it will do anything but help you. Part of that is just, having an expanded knowledge base. There will always be opportunities to learn, a new programming language or expand your knowledge within your chosen career and your chosen profession. But there will be, fewer opportunities to just explore oh, I don't know anything about astronomy. It seems kind of interesting. I want to go learn about that. So definitely try to take, a good variety of classes. I'm starting to think about how to segue into thinking about jobs and thinking about careers and how best to prepare yourself during college for getting jobs. When I do that, I will probably focus on computer science jobs specifically. But if you are interested about other types of jobs, say product management or consulting or finance, feel free to include it in the Q&A and I'll try to address it as best as I can. I will again briefly tackle some of the questions that are already here before I move on to that topic. So this question is, I am in my junior year in university and just found my interest in computer science. Should I do a minor or a double major in computer science? Great question. Junior year is about when I started thinking I might want to get more into computer science and more into working in the tech industry. So I would say that is roughly when I found my passion for computer science. Because of the way that the computer science major at my school was structured, so the classes you needed to take, all that, it was basically impossible for me to fit in a double major that late in the game without taking an extra semester. So I actually opted to just do a minor in computer science. It worked out for me. I would say part of why it worked out was that I decided to go to grad school and, pursue master's programs that were very technology focused. Without that, I think it probably would have been a bit harder to find software engineering opportunities than if I had done a double major. So I would say if you can think of a course plan for your next 2 years that would allow you to do a double major without, having 100 hours a week of homework to do, then definitely go for it and try to do it. Alternatively, if you are willing or able to do a master's degree, they are very expensive traditionally. The online Masters of Computer Science from Georgia Tech is significantly less expensive, but that is always a solid opportunity if you don't think that you can double major and are willing and able to go back to school for another year or two. Should we study computer science if we want to do something like web development or something that isn't software engineering? Or should we choose another major? This will depend on the school that you go to. One great thing about Cornell is that it had a lot of technology adjacent majors. So if you don't know that you're interested in computer science, then I would recommend looking into fields like information science or human-computer interaction, because these are fields that tend to involve a lot of technology, and you tend to, for a career in those fields, you end up working with developers a lot of the time, but those may be significantly more interesting to you and lead to significantly more a significantly more compelling career for you in the future. So try to explore a bit outside of the computer science major into some of those other technology adjacent fields. And just to reiterate, some of those fields include information science, human-computer interaction, design, anything technology related design. Also, one thing is that if you are a computer science major, you can always take up some of those adjacent fields as minors, and those will similarly expose you to opportunities outside of computer science that may offer more fulfilling job prospects to you in the future. You can also explore some of those sorts of areas through extracurriculars, internships, research. You can also flip it around a little bit and do some of those that are more interesting to you as a major and do a computer science minor. But again, I would just reiterate that it is generally easier to get into tech if you do actually major in something that is at least technology adjacent. I would say a lot of my opportunities in software engineering have come out of the fact that my major was in economics, and the opportunities that I got were somewhat related to finance, such as my current job at PayPal, which is very finance related as a company, and opportunities I've gotten with companies like BlackRock and Bloomberg, which also deal with finance. So if you do end up majoring in something like human-computer interaction and minor in computer science, that makes you a very strong applicant for any top tech company. Whereas if you major in something like history and minor in computer science, it may be a bit less useful. And it may, make you have a slightly harder time in finding internship, like opportunities to interview for internships in computer science at least. Do I believe programs like IB are useful? This is from the previous topic of college admissions. I do. I had a very different high school background, so I actually took college classes at a community college for the first 2 years of high school, and then I studied abroad going to foreign high schools for the last 2 years of high school. I actually found it a pretty big detriment to not have that background of IB or AP classes. A lot of students at top schools do have that background of having taken a lot of AP classes or having taken a lot of IB classes. And they definitely had certain benefits to it. They were able to skip certain classes. They probably had, better success rates getting into top colleges. So I would recommend doing them if you are able to, if your school offers it, and if you think that you can handle that sort of course load. How difficult is it to get a master's degree in computer science when you have an undergrad degree in liberal arts? It depends on your experience. I took something like 6 or so computer science classes during undergrad, with a lot of technology adjacent classes such as information science. And I found the transition pretty easy, but also the classes are still just kind of hard. Computer science is not what I would consider an easy subject. So the more experience you have in computer science leading up to it, the easier time you'll have when you do the master's program. That being said, I know lots and lots of people who have been able to make their way through graduate level coursework in computer science without having such a strong background. My mom actually is pursuing a PhD in computer science, and she had limited coding experience and computer science experience leading up to that. And I know a lot of other people who have made that switch without the experience, and many people in my program who have done that. And I would say you may look up estimates for how long classes take, and you may just have to multiply them by 125%. Just assume that things will take you a little bit more time if you don't have some of that existing knowledge. But if you have, kind of any exposure to computer science, any interest or passion for it, then I would say chances are you can motivate yourself to get through a master's degree and master's coursework in computer science if you try hard and put in the time. This next question is, if two students have similar GPAs, like 4.5 and 4.6, but the one with the lower GPA has more extracurriculars, do you think the extracurriculars would be weighted more? I would say yes, but it depends. Top schools are more likely to put that sort of extra weighting on extracurriculars, I would say, with the caveat of expecting a, pretty decent GPA or some explanation for a low GPA. If you are applying to less competitive schools, some of them are known for looking a bit less holistically at your application and thinking, GPA first, and then other things will be tiebreakers. So, well, again, it will kind of depend on the university in question. I would say try your best to do extracurriculars and maintain a good GPA. And also remember that when you are applying to colleges, all that you can really put in is, hey, I did sports. Hey, I won these awards for doing those sports. Or, hey, I started this club, I held a leadership role. Spending, 20 hours a week on a student club that ends up being one line of president of physics club on your application will be a lot less compelling than having the exact same title on your resume or on your application and having spent 10 hours a week less on it and ending up with a higher GPA. So it doesn't exactly, I kind of hate to say this because I think that applications for colleges should be able to be a bit more honest, but a lot of students coming out of top high schools and private schools and such are given this information that quantity is a bit better than quality as long as you have something meaningful to write an essay about. So if you have one key passion that you can talk about for an essay, then it's kind of, fill up your resume with extra activities, and that's going to help you more than if you spend, tons and tons of free time on one single activity and end up with a lower GPA because of that extra time commitment. Let's see. And then one more college-related question is, would engineering, specifically mechie or robotics, be good adjacent majors for a minor in computer science? Would there be a benefit? And do you have any tips for getting internships in this field? So I'll spend the next bit of this call focusing on getting an internship and getting a job. So I'll answer just the rest of your question first. I do think that those fields are quite complementary to computer science. That being said, if you do think that you are primarily interested in computer science, and this is something that you can kind of try out when you get to college, start out taking a mech-e class and a computer science class and start figuring out which you like more, then you may want to lean more on getting a computer science major, just because if you do have a more hardware-focused background, then it may be a bit harder to get software-type jobs than if you had a computer science major and those kind of hardware minors. The reason that I point that out is that software jobs tend to pay a bit more than hardware jobs. Not, across the board, but in a lot of cases, you're looking at, maybe anywhere from 10 to 50% higher salary if you are going for software than hardware. Hardware jobs can still pay significantly well, so don't let that be, a barrier to pursuing that if that is interesting to you. But just keep it in mind as to choosing between them and choosing which to major in and which to minor in. There is generally a benefit to having extra exposure. So if you were to be really passionate about Mechie, then it is valuable to know computer science so that you can, write the code that a robot will be controlled with. If you are incredibly passionate about computer science and about coding, then it's always going to be helpful to know how you actually create a computer chip, how a computer works, creating an actual hardware device like a Google Home. And that's all stuff that will be much easier if you do have that Mechie or robotics background. So they definitely complement each other. And I would say figure out which of those that you like more and major in the one that you want to pursue. So some of these remaining answers, some of these remaining questions that are here right now, I probably won't have time to get to. So sorry about that. But I want to leave some time for talking about getting jobs and getting internships. I'll start with internships specifically. For college students and for high school students who want to get an internship during high school, Tyler and CodeDay have actually put out a blog post or two in the past with some recommendations for that. In terms of getting a software engineering internship during college, things that can really help are having research on your resume very early. So in your freshman year, if you can work with a professor on some research project, then having that on your resume is typically what I see people who are able to get an internship in software engineering having. Let me rephrase that. Out of the people that I saw get software engineering internships during their first or second summers in college, most of them had done research in their first year. Not to say that that is entirely necessary, but it's always worth trying to get to know some professors in computer science and adjacent fields. That doesn't have to be only strictly computer science department professors either. You could maybe find a history professor who happens to want to, automate some process that can be done with code. And then you can do research through that professor that isn't actually in the computer science department, but offers a lot of the same benefits for building up a resume. If you aren't able to get that sort of research experience, the other important things to note are that you can actually, most internships kind of throughout the interview process and throughout the interview process and throughout actually having the interview, throughout actually having the internship, will really rely heavily on a data structures knowledge. And that's usually the second class in a computer science series. So in your first semester, really try to get to taking your intro computer science class. In your second semester, really try to get to taking a data structures class. Those two classes typically cover most of what you need to be able to do programming interview questions. And on that note, there's this website called leetcode.com. And let's see, yes, I will put in the Zoom chat now just what that website is. So that is a website. There are some similar ones like HackerRank, and they will actually let you just run through common programming interview type questions. And a lot of them are solvable if you have done a data structures class. So try to get to those 2 classes in your first year. That will really help you just get an idea of what it takes to get a computer science internship or computer science job. That being said, internships tend to have a harder time finding, freshmen tend to have a harder time finding internships. So research, side projects, all that will help you actually get interviews. And then practicing those kind of programming questions and having done a data structures class in your first year will really help in actually passing those interviews and getting an offer. That last bit of information, really focusing on understanding data structures, understanding algorithms, and practicing those types of interview questions is really what's going to help you get a computer science job when you are, searching in your senior year and when you're close to graduation. There are certain extracurriculars that can also help, but this will kind of vary from college to college. I know that many colleges don't really have these kind of opportunities. So if you are at a college like this, I would recommend trying to create opportunities like this. But at Cornell, for example, and at a lot of other top colleges, there are essentially clubs that form that are intended to allow students to work in teams to create very real world type projects. So for example, one of these clubs at Cornell had about, I think, like 8 people working on a mobile app to allow people to track buses in the college town that we were in. And so they worked on it for about 2 years. All of them were able to get, a 1 or 2 year long resume item saying, we built this app, here's what we did, here's the coding that we did, here's the frameworks that we used. And that sort of project where you are working with a lot of other people on a real technology product is going to be very helpful. The kind of flip side to that is that you can also get similar benefits from just creating your own side projects. You don't even necessarily need to work with someone. Working with other people will augment it, and it will show to employers that you can work with other people well when coding and when working on a technology project. But you can also just, create your own side projects, create shorter term side projects with other people, like if you go to a hackathon. And so what I actually did to build up my resume for the most part was to do some individual side projects and to have some like 2 or 3 day long hackathon projects that I did with other people that I was able to put on my resume and just say, here's some problems we ran into through the process, here's what we built, here's what technology we used to create it. Code Labs is a great opportunity to get a real head start on that because you fit into a nice time frame of long enough to really have experience working with a team and short enough that it doesn't become this major time sink that could interact or negatively impact your GPA or getting other extracurriculars and enjoying enjoying your college or high school experience in general. As we're running out of time, I'll just note 2 other things. Computer science majors tend to be very highly in demand within other types of jobs and internships. So if you major in computer science, it's actually pretty easy to get a job in consulting or investment banking and things like that. I won't go too into detail as to why, and that may not hold true in every situation, but a lot of those types of companies and those types of jobs really do look favorably upon having a computer science major. Lastly, there are also various technology and computer science conferences that also offer great opportunities for talking with employers and getting job and internship opportunities as well. So some of those include ACM. There are conferences for any programming language that you can think of. There's also ones that are diversity focused, such as Grace Hopper or Tapia. And all of those offer a lot of opportunities to connect with employers. And especially if you go to a school that is not as prestigious, that companies don't actually go to recruit students, then conferences are a really good way of connecting with those companies and getting interviews. We are at time now, so I don't know if we can go over, but I would be happy to answer a few extra questions now if anyone wants to type any in, particularly about getting jobs or getting internships. Okay, so I was told we do have extra time. So if anyone does want to ask a question, then I can stay over and answer it. But okay, so our first one is online, where would I look for jobs or internships? I typically have looked at my college job portal a lot. So at Cornell, they used something called Handshake. So that is a great place to apply for jobs because companies kind of look there first for their college recruiting pipelines. After that, I would say LinkedIn is quite good. Google Jobs actually has some pretty high quality listings. I know Indeed is out there, and so are like Monster.com. I don't find those two to offer as high quality job listings. I tend to see a lot of like fake listings on there, or really old listings that aren't really worth applying to. There's also one that's really good called Hire In, or sorry, not Hire In, Built In. So that's usually like built in and then the name of a major city. So built in Seattle, built in Boston, and those tend to have some very specific sort of opportunities in software engineering, usually with a startup in those specific cities. And those are always quite high quality job listings. There's also AngelList, which is more focused around startup opportunities, but I find that they have a lot of unpaid opportunities on there and aren't super transparent about that. So I would also recommend looking at the, I think it's called the Hacker News job portal or something. So if you look up like Hacker News job portal or Y Combinator job portal, then you'll find that job site that has opportunities specifically from companies that are in or were in Y Combinator, which is a well-known startup incubator. How do I network my way into a job? One question asks. I can actually offer an example of this. I got a very good job offer that I didn't actually end up accepting through networking. This was partially benefited at the fact that I went to a top university that has a lot of alumni in very good companies. So at a conference, I managed to meet someone who had been to my school, just started talking to them about, being in, our times back in college. From there, they offered me their contact information. I followed up, said that, I wasn't sure if there were any suitable opportunities, but I would be open to interviewing for some if they knew of any. And they actually were trying to expand their team. So I interviewed with them, ended up getting invited on site, and ended up getting an offer. So that was kind of getting past that sort of job application process straight to that first interview, which gave me the opportunity to, prove myself and whether or not I should be considered for that job. So networking is less of a, this will get you a job, and more of a, this will get you an interview, which is actually very valuable, because traditionally, if you just apply online, you might have anywhere from a 0 to 10% interview rate. Are high school internships valued when applying to jobs or colleges? It's hard to say. I would say that they can be. It kind of depends on what the internship was. It's really hard to speak with any more specificity than that. Weird word to say. It's hard to be more specific than that, but it will obviously be a bit more impactful when applying to internships later on if that high school internship was something like interned at a government agency, or interned at a known company, or interned at a startup with funding. Whereas if you intern at the high school admissions office or something like that, it will probably mean a bit less. That doesn't mean it doesn't help, but there are various degrees to it. So I would try to consider, will that internship help me more than other things that I could be doing? Will it help my, college applications more? And how will that, all equal out later on? So if you think that, this internship won't be very valuable, and that your time could better be spent studying or doing some extracurricular that would augment your college applications to get you into a college that will, make it a bit easier to get interviews, then I would say, maybe that internship isn't worth doing. Is it easy to get a job right after graduation? Yes and no. In computer science, it's significantly easier. In computer science, if you are able to get internships and side projects on your resume, and you are able to practice interview programming questions, then I would say it is pretty reasonable to get a job right after graduation. If you are in economics, like I was, I would say it's a fair bit harder, and it will only get harder the less stuff you have on your resume. So hopefully I've provided some advice to help guide how to get those sorts of experiences that will make it easier. But definitely don't feel bad if it is proving to be difficult. I applied to probably 4,000 or so jobs before I actually started switching over to computer science, and had a much easier time of it after I did switch to computer science. Going back to the colleges topic, how do I talk about things like CodeDay within my undergrad application? Where in the application do I highlight internships and other side projects? It will differ by college, but a lot of colleges use the common application. So if you apply to 20 some colleges, you basically fill out one application once, and then fill out a few short questions per college to apply to the rest of them. So within that application, I would say wherever it seems like it would fit best, there are a few sections of that application that say things like, what experiences do you have? What extracurriculars do you have? I think it may include a section for like, do you have any work experience? So just include it there, try to write about it as best as you can. If you're having trouble explaining what these sorts of positions were, then try to look at LinkedIn profiles of like people who actually have jobs at companies like Facebook or Google, see how they explain their side projects, how they explain their experience, and try to use that to figure out how to explain what you were able to do during Code Labs, CodeDay, and other side projects. This will be, I think, the last question. What skills and technologies should younger students, high school and underclassmen, know to have more internship opportunities? This one is a bit hard to say. There are a lot of different tech stacks that can be beneficial. I would say most companies will be looking for students who know either Java, C++, or Python, just out of virtue of those are the main languages that are taught in a university setting. There's a caveat there of programming languages. Once you know one, you can kind of learn any of them. They aren't interchangeable, and there are some, intricacies that you have to figure out, but you can generally translate somewhat easily from one language to another. And that is a skill that everyone here should get used to, because that is really invaluable as you get into the workforce and into internships. In my job, for example, let's say in the past month, I've probably touched about 5 different programming languages. And I wouldn't say that I am an expert in any of them, but through a lot of Googling and just general knowledge of how to code, I'm able to get by. But definitely companies will be expecting to see at least one of, Java, Python, or C++ primarily. It's also valuable to get experience with some of the, more modern languages like Rust or Go, especially if you're going to be looking at opportunities in startups. I'll say that we should probably wrap this up. If you ask questions, any further questions on Discord, there will probably be people there who can answer. If you tag me in it, I will also try to answer. My name is the same on there as it is on the event invite. The last thing I would suggest to everyone is to look up what a REST API is. So part of being a software engineer is coding. Most people throughout high school and even a computer science major don't actually know what that coding entails. They don't know what a software engineer actually does. For a lot of people, that will be front-end web development. That's things like HTML, JavaScript, CSS. For a lot of others, that will be back-end development. And back-end development is primarily creating REST APIs, to be fully honest. So go look up how a REST API works. It's really not very complicated, but it's the way in which you get from something like facebook.com/post for posting a status to Facebook to actually getting to the code that controls that posting of a status. And it will basically just look like, one line of code to say at, facebook.com/post, I want to run this function of code. So it's a lot simpler than people might think. And looking up just what a REST API is, creating a really simple one will help make computer science a bit less intimidating, because that really is what a lot of really, smart and well-paid software engineers actually do on a very regular basis within their job as a primary function of their job. So thanks everyone for coming. I am kind of amazed that so many of you showed up, so I'm hoping that this information was useful. And have a great rest of your day.